And Alice West. This is 29 March 1987, and we're going to reminisce a little bit.
Well, you were mentioning just a few minutes ago about, did I remember any particular little instance that happened during the time that I was growing up. And so approximately 65 years ago, Brunel and I were out in the field with our hose, and as we were preparing to come back in from the field for our dinner, we looked up in the sky, and going northwest was a ball of fire about the same size as the sun as it comes up early in the morning over the mountain. And it was traveling at such a high rate of speed we couldn't hear anything, but we followed this ball of fire for just 3 or 4 seconds, and at that time it had traveled about 30 miles, as near as I can remember. And so then we decided, well, the thing we'll do is wait and watch the newspapers and see if anybody else saw it. So we watched the newspapers for a week. Nobody reported anything, and so we decided, well, this is kind of late in the season to be saying anything, so we never did say any more about it. Age of being scouts, that is, Brunel had already joined, and I was preparing to join. I had passed my first class test the day I was, is it 12 when they, yeah, the day I was 12. So as I journeyed through that summer, we came up with a scout trip that went up back of Timpanogos Mountain. And the thing that I remember so much about it was that we had a wagon that would pack most of our things, and so most of us little kids, I think I was about the size of Craig then. I wasn't very big then, so I didn't have too much to pack. And we went up over this mountain, and there was a bunch of switchbacks. They just came back and forth like this to go up this big grade. And so some of the kids, instead of going way up the road and then back, they just climb up over this hill a little ways and get up on the road next, and then wait for the rest of the guys to get there. Well, at that point I was too tired to go around, so I just kept on walking back and forth up this grade. When we finally got to our campsite and settled down and got our beds prepared, got squared away for the evening, decided around the campfire that night that on the morrow we'd make a trip up over the top of the ridge and see what was up over there, and just make a circle back around the ridge a ways and then back down to camp. Well, we didn't have much trouble of getting up the ridge. It wasn't too far, but when we got up there, it was right on top of the world. You could see ridges and mountain ridges for just miles and miles and miles. And so we stood there deciding what to do, and over just 50 yards from where we stood as a group, there was a ridge that the widest spot on it was about 2 feet, and the narrowest spot on it was about 6 inches. And we decided, well, we'd go across that, and then the mountain widened out a little bit so that we could get good footholds. Wouldn't be a slipping and sliding and maybe fall down the mountain. And our scout leader Paul Walker was riding his horse. They called him Old Roan. He was a pretty good horse, and he knew the country and knew how to handle himself. And instead of Paul getting down off of the horse and out of the saddle, he just stayed right on in the saddle of his horse. And so we moved over to this ridge, and it was about 50 yards across it. Rock, just solid rock down the side of it. I think there was two or three, maybe there might have been 3 boys there back of me that was next to the last ones, and then Paul with his horse, he was going to wait and come last. And as we just stood there watching, Paul started to cross this ridge, and then he see that the ledge was just a little bit tippy there, and maybe he had better do it. So he turned his horse around, and right where he was turning the horse around was a little sagebrush that stuck up in the air about 2 feet. It wasn't a very big one, just a little one, but just a single one stuck up there. And as the horse turned around, he wanted to clear himself so that he wouldn't be a falling, and so he reared up and made the turn. But as he reared up, he went too far up in the air, and it threw him over backwards. And I see Paul kick his feet out of the stirrups, and as he slid off the horse down as he was falling, he says, "Oh God." And that's all I heard. And then his horse went down in front of him and landed on his side, and then his feet turned up, and when his feet came over down to the slope again, they caught and threw the horse up in the air and down again. And as he did that, the first time, Paul rolled right square underneath him, and we were sure that when the horse landed, it'd land right square on Paul, but he didn't. Paul just rolled just fast enough that he kept a teeny bit ahead of the horse, but each time we was afraid the horse was going to fall on him, and he did that several times. Each time he just cleared the horse, and finally he stopped in the brush down to the bottom of this slick rock, and just lay there. And so as a group we all scrambled down as fast as we could to get down to him, and of course a few rocks slipped out from under our feet and rolled down. Some of them hit Paul as he was laying there, and so everybody was cautioned then to not go that way but go around. And a few minutes later, one of my cousins, Blaine Johnson, went down to look at the horse and see how he was doing. He was just laying there. And he had his back broken just back of the saddle, where the saddle sits up on the top of the horse. And apparently, as he'd hit on those, as he's turning, the force of the hit broke the horse's back. And so Blaine got an axe and killed the horse. Well, by the time he got that little job done, we had got another little axe. You know, scouts usually has a half a dozen little axes with them. And so we had chopped 2 poles about 8 feet long, and about 2 inches at the small end and about 3 inches at the larger end. And we take our shirts, take a hold of the two poles on one end, and somebody grab a hold of our shirts and pull them right over this tripod, and we made a good stretcher for Paul. And so we put him on this stretcher, and four of us. Now imagine four little kids about the size of Scott or of Craig, trying to pack a 150 to 200 pound man up a mountain that the kids that was above us, in fact, the ones that was on the bottom side of this tripod helping Paul up could reach out just straight with their arm and touch the edge of the mountain again. And so the ones that was above had to stoop down to get a hold of the pole on their side to go up the mountain. And we was only down there about 75, maybe 100 feet at the most. And it took us better than 2 hours to get him up to the top of that ridge. Four of us on each side. I remember pretty soon I got give out, and so we traded off another group and had them wore out, traded off with another group and had them wore out. Finally we got Paul up to the top of the mountain. Now this was the interesting part of it, was that Paul would go in and out of consciousness. And when he'd come back into consciousness, he'd talk about the baseball game that we had played the afternoon before. And one of the boys that didn't know hardly how to play, he was telling him how to do it, how to hang on to the bat, and how to hit it. And he was just rooting him on, and was just having a big time. And then he'd start shivering, and he'd have chills and fever, and then chills and fever. And so finally, let's see, I believe there was two out of the group there that held the Melchizedek priesthood. One of them was James Cullimore, who's I think passed away just recently. He used to be one of the helpers for the 12 apostles, and then he was put in as one of the 70s when they broadened out the 70s quorum, first quorum of 70s. And the other one was Dean Anderson. And so they administered to Paul and gave him a blessing. And I think that had a great deal to do with his ability to pull through with that. Anyway, Dean left us, Dean Anderson left us in the group, and he went up the mountain north of Timpanogos camp into a little place where they were running some mines, and he got some help from the miners up there, and they came down and helped us out. But by that time we had made it back down to camp with Paul and his group of scouts. And so that was the end of our scouting in that little territory. I remember Burnell was an Eagle Scout, and James was an Eagle Scout, and so was Dean Anderson, an Eagle Scout. I think we had one others, but I can't remember who it was right now. Dad had usually 3 or 4 or 5 acres of sugar beets. And they apparently, just about this time, they had found that they needed to plant the sugar beets and single them out in about a 8 to 12 inch spacing. And so Dad had us little kids back of him. He'd hoe a couple of rows at a time, and we'd come along and thin them down to 1 beet. As I look back on it, I imagine Dad happened to be real good at hoeing, because we got to be real good at thinning. And I think the year after we, no, that was the year before this accident with Paul. We was up to their place, and they had 20-30 acres of beets there on their place. And we went out thinned for, Burnell and I thinned for Paul and Harold. They were brothers, and we just lacked 1 or 2 rows that day of thinning an acre apiece. But they were 2 real good blockers and did a wonderful job. By the time they made that last swipe with the hoe at the end of the row, we had the beet thinned out. But I'll tell you, at the end of the day, I had my knees thinned out too.
You were farming your entire life, right?
Yes. Yes, well, what else was there to do? Mm-hmm. In those days, in fact, until we'd been married 5 or 6 years before much had done any changing in farming. Prices were still terrifically low, and you couldn't get much for your produce. You could sell a cow for $65 or less, and steer for that or less. There wasn't that much money involved in the things. And
World War II, and then things began to pick up a little bit.
As soon as we came into World War II, then things began to pick up. Prices made change. We had farmers around us that made their millions raising potatoes. This was an interesting subject too. We went down to borrow some money so we could get involved in some cattle, and the government wouldn't loan for cattle, but they'd loan all you wanted to borrow if you'd raise potatoes. Well, these 2 or 3 farmers that we knew that made their millions in that were just a little bit sharper than I was, and they could see what was ahead, and I couldn't. And the way they made it, government offered us, or told us they'd guarantee us $1 a sack for the potatoes at the end of the season, and that wasn't too much, but if a guy got that for all his potatoes, why, he could do pretty good. And so at the end of the season, everybody had caught on and was raising potatoes but us, and they sack them up, put them in their trucks and take them down to the rail yard and load them on the car, turn right around and buy them back and load their car back up with the same potatoes they took in. And I'm not sure that this is true, but I think they just went down the roadways and turned the car around and brought the same sacks and sold them over and over and over again to the government for $1 a sack. They paid, what was it, 10 cents a sack to get them back. So this is the way they made their money. Few of them really got wealthy on that. Well, we got a little place up to Horseshoe Bend and started the farming up there. It was a real nice ranch, 275 acres with deeded water right. That means you don't pay anything for your water. All you got to do is keep your ditch up and you just irrigate. Well, there was a few of those in the country, and this was one of them. So this is where Alice and I got acquainted. Do you want?
Go ahead, you're doing fine. You had some thoughts there.
Where's Horseshoe Bend at?
I found out from the neighbors that Alice's folks had a little piece there next to me that I could use for pasture, and I wanted to hold as much of the pasture that I had for the cows I was milking. And so we rented the pasture from them. I went down to, was that, where was he living then? What was it?
Brownlee.
Oh, yeah. I went down to Brownlee and
Where's that near?
That's
from
just,
Horseshoe Bend, that'd be about straight west.
And where's Horseshoe Bend?
Horseshoe Bend is north and west of Boise, Idaho. About
Okay.
about
30 miles,
in the neighborhood.
somewhere in that. It's about the same distance as it was from Horseshoe Bend down to Emmett. Emmett would be approximately straight west, down, just follow down the river. Of course, the river is bending back and forth, but we went up and talked with Alice's folks and knocked on the door, and here came Alice, and I asked her if she had knowledge of a pasture that belonged to one of the Casper boys, and she said, well, yes, she did. Her brothers were up in the field and pointed in the direction, said if you'd like to go up there, well, you can talk with them, and they'll inform you of what it is, what the score is on it. So that's what I did. Went on up and talked with her brother, Bill, and I think there's Merle there too, wasn't there?
I think so.
I can't remember. Anyway, I had a young man with me, and he was going to rent the place, and then I'd put my cattle on the place there, and he'd take care of it. Well, turned out that as we went back home, Alice invited us in to dinner, and so we stopped long enough to have dinner before we went back down.
I fed him beans. He liked my beans.
Well, interesting enough, I found that Alice says she came down with her brothers a time or two where we were on the ranch. She was the only young lady that I'd been with in my entire life that wanted to do something for me. All the rest of them wanted me to do something for them. And so that was one of the things that attracted me so much towards her. And this young man that was with me when we went up to see about the place, he made some remark about, well, that was a nice little girl, maybe he'd try to get her thought, yeah, we'll see about that. And so as the time come that we rented the place, why, he wasn't around, of course, he's gonna come back, wasn't around, so I rented it and just put him out of my mind, and finally he came back and wanted to go in on it, and I told him, well, it's already rented now, and I had the papers all fixed up, and I thought maybe we'd just go ahead and go the way we were rather than go with him on it. But it wasn't really that, it was I wanted to get rid of him.
You didn't want his competition.
I didn't want him a competition around there at all, period. So that's how we got acquainted. We never had really a date out together by ourselves until the day we was married. I had a tractor and a mowing machine that went with the tractor, and Bill had quite a lot of hay. Of course, we had over 100 acres hay there on the ranch.
Bill was your brother.
Yeah, that would be Alice's
My brother.
oldest brother, older brother. I told Bill if he'd come down and help me in the hay, I'd go out and cut his hay and help him out there, because we could get his put up earlier than we could get mine. Mine was irrigated, and his was a dry form, and it had to be put up before the cheatgrass in the hay got too ripe. And so we went up and just got started in it. Wouldn't you know, it started to rain, and it rained every cotton picking day for a week. So we didn't have anything to do but to wait around, and I talked with Alice one evening outside the house, and I proposed to her and asked her if she'd like to be Mrs. West. She said she sure would. So I gave her a kiss, and told her, I said, well, why don't you go in and talk to your folks and tell them what we've decided. Was it the next day we went down and got married?
I think that was Saturday night.
Yeah, we went down Monday, wasn't it?
Went down Monday.
Went down Monday.
We'd gone down Sunday, only we couldn't get married then. Get a license.
Yeah, I had to go on home and borrow some money from the folks in order to get married.
Again?
Mom, why don't you tell your side of the story of how you met Dad?
Well, that's quite a story. My brother Merle lost his wife, Margaret. He was left with 4 children, and so my dad was alive then. And so we took these little kids in, and I took care of them for about 8.5 years before I married Dad. And so that's what he saw me doing, was taking care of 4 little kids. But anyway, they were getting pretty good sized kids then. And but here I was, a woman that was over the 30-year-old mark, and I didn't even have a boyfriend. Actually had. But so about 6 years before I met Dad, I decided this wasn't funny anymore. That here I was, an old maid, that's what we called them then. They call them bachelor girls now. And I didn't want to spend my last years alone. So every night I would kneel down on my knees and ask my Heavenly Father to do something about this, because I'd had my patriarchal blessing when I was 17 years old, and it promised me that I would be privileged to go to the temple and be married to a man that would be worthy of the gospel. So of course I reminded my Heavenly Father about this and said I didn't want to fool around with guys that I wasn't going to marry and that wasn't the right guy, and I wanted to know when I met this man. And without a doubt I wanted to know. So the day that Ray and this man stepped up to the door, I stood there and Ray introduced himself. As Ray stepped up to the door, I looked at him and he asked me if we had the pasture, and I told him yes. You heard Dad's story on that. And but you know, I tried to move and I couldn't. I don't know whether you've ever been shocked with an electric fence or not. But standing upright like I was, it felt just like the current of an electric wire, and it went right up one side of my body and down the other, and I couldn't have moved no matter how much I had to wanted to. I just couldn't, because I'd been knocked down with an electric fence. And I was pinned to the ground, and I know just how it felt. But I looked at Ray and watched him walk across the creek. There was a creek between the barn and the house, and a nice guy, you know, and he's got some ambition to him. The guy that had come up to see me from Utah a few years before that, he laid down to cut potatoes, and I decided I didn't want a man to make a living for him. So I was attracted to Ray West, and I run in and I told my mother, I said, I just met the cutest man you ever saw. Well, she says, where is he? I want to see him. Well, she liked Ray too. And as Ray, that day, when he ate the beans and turned around to get his hat to put it on to go, he said, well, we'll have to get better acquainted. And I thought so too. And when Ray went out and our family kind of got together, I told my folks, I said, that's the man I want to marry. And I did. But we knew one another a little over a year, and then we were married. And I've never been sorry, not 1 minute. We really had a wonderful life together. And I loved him very much. But each year, I think I love him more. And that's the way it should be. What else would she want? Who would she want? He's like positive.
Dad, you worked at Bingham. Perhaps you could tell us what that was and what you did.
Well, first year I went up there,
There was a mine, what kind?
I got hired on as, no, I was still just a kid. I wasn't that big, and so they hired and hired and hired and hired. Pretty soon I was making a trip, third or fourth time around there, and they still bypassed me. And I went in to see the man that's doing the hiring after the hiring hours were over with, and asked him why he kept turning me down. I said, I'm a good worker. I'll do what's necessary to be done. And he said, well, he said, you're just a kid. And he said, I hate to hire these kids. But finally, he said, you come on in the morning with the rest of the group, and said, we'll see what we can do. So the next morning, he hired me, and I was shipped up on the hill around the backside. The thing that we were doing was moving track, leveling the track up, and then would keep moving it out a little bit each day. We just level it and move it, level it and move it. And as we moved it, we just waited until the cars had come around with what we called the muck ore that was not, didn't have any amount of copper in it. And they had to bring it around on this side of this particular side of the hill and dump it. And when they had as much dumped on our track side as they could, then we'd level the little ridge up that they'd always leave and move the track over, and they'd do it over again. And this was the process that followed, just day in and day out. I worked there one winter, and some of the days that wasn't snowing, a lot of days that it'd be snowing, but most of the days it wasn't snowing, but we couldn't tell whether it was or not because the wind would blow up these dump sides, and it'd make the wind swirl just as it got up to the top of this little dump, flat part of the dump, and the snow would swirl around us, and we thought it was a blizzard all the time. So we were actually working in a blizzard in snow for 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, for wages that we couldn't possibly pay for our board and room without skimping. So we'd get one meal there at the commissary, and then we'd get a big lunch. We got up as high as 8 sandwiches, double sandwiches with meat and stuff on them, and that's the way we lived.
About what year was this?
Oh, that would be in 28, I think. 28 and 29 and 30. We got laid off middle of December in 30, and that's when the big break came, and they actually had to lay off a lot of people off of the hill, and I happened to be one of those that got laid off. Well, after I'd worked there through the winter, I had a chance to change the job I was on and go down into the assay office, and that was inside job and paid just a little bit more. During the summer and fall of 1930, I was making $4.65 a day. Now, shovel runners and the cranemen on the shovels were making $6 and I think $6 and $6.20 a day. So I wasn't doing too bad right at that particular time. I'd saved, through that summer, I'd saved $180. I figured if I saved another $20, I'd be down payment for a new car. And those times, what was the cars? $400 or $500.
Did the Great Depression have much effect on where you lived and worked?
Yeah, it sure did.
That's why they laid you off when you first went to work there, was when they gave the work to married men in the 70s.
That's the only ones they kept, was the married men. And I didn't go back to work for them then until 1936. Went back up, same procedure over again, but it didn't take only 3 or 4 weeks or so until they transferred me again down to the assay office. Well, I did pretty good that fall, 36.
You'd been to college for a while, though.
Yeah. During the time that we were laid off until I got back to work with them, I went back and finished the 4th year of high school and then went on up to college for 2.5 years. When Burnell got married, that was in the first part of January, the last part of December. I guess it was the last part of December. Then I decided the best thing I could do was to just get out of there. The thing that bothered me right then on education was I was up on the hill, went back up in 36, and went to work for him again for a while. And on that particular gang of 16 people, there was 4 out of the 16 that had a college education, a 4-year college education, or me with a 2.5-year education. And I looked at the group. Well, what good is education at this particular time? Couldn't go any place to get a job. Wasn't any jobs. And so I think that was one of the big reasons I quit school and went back on the farm and went to work.
Well, when Purnell got married, and so he didn't have anybody to stay with.
Yeah.
And he didn't have enough money to rent a place to live.
Purnell told me that I could stay with them for $20 a month. Well, that $20 a month isn't very much, but at 2 bits an hour, working wages, then $20 a month turns out to be quite a sum. For instance, Purnell had worked for about 6 weeks, and we took her money and went down and bought us some clothes to work in, shirts and overalls, and shoes and socks. And we had spent most of our money. We had it wrapped, had the clothes and stuff all wrapped up in one big bundle there. And just as we was ready to go, the clerk said, "Come here," he said, "I want to show you something." So we left her package there on the counter next to the till, and he took us down to the other end, and we heard somebody come in and then in just seconds go back out again. When we went back over to the counter, within 3 minutes, our package was gone. And the clerk wouldn't do anything about it. We'd already paid him. You know, that's your loss. He said, I can't guarantee anything. And so for 6 weeks we worked for nothing. Got 2 bits an hour. And that was heavy work too. That was as heavy work as it was up on the mines. Well, but it was a job anyway. I wasn't sorry we ended up getting what little education I got. Didn't pan out that it was worthwhile later on, because after I started working for Ore-Ida Foods, they told me that because of my education, they'd promote me to one of their foremans and ship me up to Burley, Idaho. Now he said, I want you to remember that this is your education that's doing this, because we've got men that's been here a long time that have been waiting for this job. So when I got up to Burley, I found out that they had lost every foreman they had up there on that particular shift because they couldn't keep them there. It wasn't because of my education really after all, but yeah, it was still a lot of fun. At one time, while I was up there as foreman, we had 139 women and I believe 22 men was on each of our shifts, day, graveyard, and the night shift.
Swing.
So yeah,
Graveyard and swing.
Swing and graveyard, yeah. And I tried to memorize those girls' names. My criminy, I'd get them all mixed up. But I did help the girls out. My boss would come down occasionally and stand there and talk to me, and he'd watch the girls over there, and he'd say, Ray, you see that girl over there on that particular row? He said, go ahead and can her. Okay, that's what you want. He says, see this one over here? Go ahead and can her. Instead of canning them, getting rid of them, I went to each of the girls and taught them how to handle the potatoes so they could do a good job and keep up with the other girls on the tables. And while none of them thanked me for it individually, I'm sure all of them that I helped felt good about not getting laid off. Everybody that was working there wanted the job. They needed the job.
How long did you work for Ore-Ida?
Let's see, how long?
Started in the
60.
last of 60, and then we were operated on in 74, 11th of March. That was the last year.
Yeah, that'd be almost 14 years.
But he had vacation and sick leaves and stuff that put him through until he was 65 years old.
Mm-hmm.
The people who were above me in foremans and superintendents above me, the plant manager said, well, now look, this is a new year, Ray's got a vacation coming again. So then they added the vacation to me with the a job, and then I had this coming and I had that coming. They kept it going until I got my full wages from the middle of March, was it?
And we went down there about the 1st of March, I think, because they gave you your heart tests, and then we went back to the 11th of March, and that's when we were operated on.
Yeah, 11th of March until 21st of September, they gave them my full wages.
Did you guys have cars when you were around when you were youngsters out in your part of the country? Do you remember? Did you have them out there that much?
Not until first car that I remember, Bill, was one of the neighbors, and he had done quite well. He had the little mining stock, and mining, the stock was doing good, and they got quite a little bit of money out of the stock, and so he went into town, into Provo, and bought a car. I can't remember whether it was a pickup or just a